Maria Santos woke up before sunrise on that cold October morning. The alarm clock showed 4:30 a.m., but she was already awake. She had been hunting in these Montana mountains since she was 12 years old. Her grandfather taught her everything about tracking animals and shooting rifles. Now at 28 years old, she was known as one of the best hunters in the small town of Cedar Falls. She got dressed in her warm hunting clothes, brown jacket, thick pants, and heavy boots that would not make noise when walking through the forest. Maria checked her rifle carefully. It was her grandfather's old hunting rifle that he gave her before he died. The rifle was 30 years old but still worked perfectly. She loaded it with 5 bullets and put extra bullets in her jacket pocket. Maria drove her old pickup truck to the edge of the forest. The dirt road ended at a small parking area where hunters usually started their trips. She was the only person there. Most hunters did not come this deep into the mountains. The area was known to be dangerous because it was so far from any help. If something went wrong, a person could be lost for days before anyone found them. She started walking into the forest at 5:15 a.m. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the tall pine trees. Maria followed an old animal trail that went deeper into the mountains. She had walked this same path many times before. Her grandfather used to bring her here when she was young. He taught her how to read animal tracks in the dirt and how to move quietly through the trees. After walking for 2 hours, Maria found fresh deer tracks in the soft mud near a small stream. The tracks were large, which meant it was probably a big male deer. She could see drops of blood on the ground next to the tracks. The deer was wounded, probably shot by another hunter who could not find it. Maria decided to follow the blood trail to find the wounded animal and put it out of its pain. She followed the blood drops for another hour. The trail led her to a part of the forest she had never seen before. The trees were thicker here, and the ground was covered with fallen leaves that made soft sounds under her feet. Maria had to be very careful not to step on branches that would make loud cracking noises. A wounded deer would be very scared and would run away at the smallest sound. The blood trail led her up a steep hill. Maria climbed slowly, stopping every few minutes to catch her breath and listen for sounds. The forest was very quiet. She could only hear birds singing in the trees and the wind blowing through the leaves. After climbing for 30 minutes, she reached the top of the hill. From the hilltop, Maria could see a small valley below. There was a clearing in the middle of the valley with no trees. She took out her binoculars and looked down at the clearing. At first, she did not see anything unusual. Then she noticed movement on the far side of the clearing. Maria focused her binoculars and saw 5 men setting up some kind of camp. They had several large backpacks and were taking out equipment. At first, she thought they might be hunters like herself, but something looked wrong. The men were not dressed like hunters. They wore dark clothes and baseball caps pulled down low over their faces. She watched them for several minutes. One man took out a small scale like the ones used to weigh food. Another man opened a backpack and pulled out several plastic bags filled with white powder. Maria felt her heart start beating faster. She realized these men were not hunters. They were drug dealers setting up a place to package and sell illegal drugs. Maria knew she was in serious danger. Drug dealers were very dangerous people who would hurt anyone who saw their illegal activities. She was alone in the forest, with no way to call for help. Her cell phone had no signal this deep in the mountains. The nearest town was 15 miles, away through thick forest. She decided to back away quietly and leave the area. Maria would go back to town and call the police to report what she had seen. She started to move backward very slowly, being extra careful not to make any noise. She took one step back, then another. Everything was going well until her boot came down on a dead branch hidden under the leaves. The branch made a loud cracking sound that echoed through the quiet forest like a gunshot. Maria froze in place, hoping the men had not heard the noise. She waited for 10 seconds without moving. Then she heard one of the men shout something to the others. She looked through her binoculars and saw all 5 men looking up toward the hill where she was hiding. The tallest man had a long scar across his left cheek. He pointed directly at the spot where Maria was hiding and said something to his companions. The other men immediately dropped what they were doing and started moving toward the bottom of the hill. They were coming to find her. Maria felt panic rising in her chest. She had 2 choices. She could try to run away through the forest, But the men probably knew these mountains better than she did. Or she could stay and fight, but there were 5 of them and only 1 of her. Either way, she was in the worst situation of her life. She gripped her rifle tighter and tried to think of what her grandfather would do. He always told her that in dangerous situations, the most important thing was to stay calm and think clearly. Panic would get her killed. Maria took 3 deep breaths and tried to make a plan. The men were getting closer. She could hear them talking as they climbed up the hill toward her hiding place. In a few minutes, they would find her. Maria realized that running away was not possible anymore. The men had seen her general location, and they would catch her before she could get far enough away to be safe. She had no choice but to face them. Maria checked her rifle one more time and said a quiet prayer that she would survive the next few minutes. She could hear the men getting very close now. Her life was about to change forever. Maria heard heavy footsteps getting closer through the fallen leaves. She crouched lower behind the thick pine tree and held her breath. Her heart was beating so loud she was afraid the men would hear it. Through the trees, she could see the man with the scar on his face leading the other 4 men up the hill. They were spread out in a line, searching every tree and bush. The scarred man held a pistol in his right hand. The other men also had weapons. Maria could see knives and guns tucked into their belts. These were not ordinary criminals. They looked like professional killers who had done this kind of work many times before. Their movements were careful and organized, like soldiers searching for an enemy. Maria tried to make herself smaller behind the tree trunk. She was wearing brown hunting clothes that blended in with the forest colors, but she knew it would not help her much longer. The men were only 50 feet away now, and getting closer every second. She could hear them talking in low voices as they searched. "She's up here somewhere," the scarred man said in a rough voice. "Nobody makes that much noise by accident. Find her and bring her to me alive. We need to know if she's alone or if there are others." One of the other men, a fat guy with a black beard, laughed quietly. "What kind of person comes hiking alone in these mountains anyway? Probably just some stupid tourist who got lost." "Doesn't matter who she is," another man said. This one was short, but very muscular, with tattoos covering his arms. She saw too. "Much. Boss won't be happy if we let a witness walk away." The 4th man was young, maybe only 20 years old. He looked nervous and kept looking around like he expected police to jump out from behind every tree. "Maybe we should just pack up and leave. This place feels wrong to me." The 5th man was the biggest of all of them. He was at least 6.5 feet tall and looked like he could break a person in half with his bare hands. He did not say anything, just kept searching with cold, dark eyes that missed nothing. Maria realized they were going to find her no matter what she did. The tree she was hiding behind was not big enough to keep her hidden much longer. She had maybe 30 seconds before they would see her. She needed to make a decision fast. She could try to shoot one of them and then run, but there were 5 of them and they were all armed. Even if she hit one, the others would probably kill her before she could reload. Her grandfather's old rifle only held 5 bullets and she would need perfect aim to have any chance. Or she could surrender and hope they would let her go if she promised not to tell anyone what she saw. But Maria had heard what they said about witnesses. These men had no intention of letting her leave this forest alive no matter what she promised them. The scarred man was now only 20 feet away. Maria could see his face clearly. His eyes were cold and empty like a shark. The scar on his cheek was old and deep, probably from a knife fight. This was a man who had hurt people before and would not hesitate to hurt her. "I can hear you breathing, lady," he called out in a voice that was trying to sound friendly but failed completely. "There's nowhere to run and 5 of us to your 1. Come out now and we can talk about this like civilized people. Keep hiding and things are going to get much worse for you." Maria knew he was lying. There would be no talking. She took a deep breath and made her choice. She stepped out from behind the tree with her rifle held in front of her, but pointed down at the ground. Her finger was not on the trigger. She did not want to give them any reason to start shooting immediately. "There she is," the fat man with the black beard said with a nasty smile. "Just a little girl with a big gun. This should be fun." The 5 men quickly moved to surround her. Maria turned slowly, trying to keep all of them in her sight. But it was impossible. They formed a circle around her with about 10 feet between each man. She was completely trapped. The scarred man stepped closer and looked her up and down like she was a piece of meat he was thinking about buying. Well, well, what do we have here? You're a pretty little thing, aren't you? What's your name, honey? Maria did not answer. She was trying to remember everything her grandfather had taught her about dangerous situations. Stay calm. Watch for opportunities. Never give up hope. Most importantly, never let fear take control of your mind. I asked you a question, the scarred man said, his voice getting harder. When I ask a question, I expect an answer. What's your name and what are you doing in our forest? My name is Maria, she said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. I was just hunting deer. I got lost and wandered into this area by accident. I don't want any trouble. I just want to go home. The short man with tattoos laughed. Hunting? Deer with that old rifle? That thing looks like it belongs in a museum. I bet it doesn't even work properly. It works fine, Maria said before she could stop herself. She immediately regretted speaking. These men did not need to know anything about her or her weapon. The scarred man smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a cat gives to a mouse right before killing it. I'm sure it does work fine. But we can't have you carrying a weapon around our business operation. Drop the rifle, Maria, nice and slow. Maria felt her last hope slipping away. Once she gave up her rifle, she would be completely defenseless against 5 armed criminals. But she had no choice. The man with the scar had his pistol pointed at her chest, and she could see his finger moving toward the trigger. I said drop. It, he repeated, his voice getting dangerous. Maria slowly bent down and placed her grandfather's rifle on the ground at her feet. The metal made a soft clicking sound as it touched the rocky ground. The sound felt like the door to her tomb closing. The moment the rifle left her hands, the fat man rushed forward and grabbed it. He held it up and looked at it with professional interest. This is actually a pretty good rifle, he said. Old, but well maintained. Someone taught this girl how to take care of her weapons. The big man stepped forward and kicked the rifle away from Maria, sending it sliding across the ground until it disappeared into some thick bushes 20 feet away. Now she had no weapon and no hope of reaching it if she needed to defend herself. The scarred man holstered his pistol and took another step closer to Maria. Now he was close enough that she could smell his bad breath and see the gold tooth in his smile. That's better. Now we can have a civilized conversation. You see, Maria, we have a little problem here. You wandered into something you weren't supposed to see. That puts us in a very difficult position. Maria's mouth felt dry as sand, but she forced herself to speak. I won't tell anyone what I saw here, I promise. Just let me go, and I'll never come back to this part of the forest again. All 5 men laughed, but it was not the kind of laughter that came from something funny. It was the cold laughter of people who enjoyed causing fear and pain. Oh, sweet little Maria, the scarred man said, shaking his head like he was talking to a small child. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. You see, promises don't mean anything in our line of work. The only way to be absolutely sure someone won't talk is to make sure they can never talk again. The circle of men started closing in around her. The 5 men moved closer to Maria like wolves closing in on a deer. She could see the evil intentions in their eyes. The scarred man was still smiling his cold smile, but now he looked like he was enjoying her fear. Maria's hands started shaking, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Please, she said, looking at each man in turn. I have a family waiting for me at home. I have a younger sister who depends on me. I work at the local school teaching children. People will miss me if I don't come home tonight. The fat man with the black beard laughed again. Listen to her begging already. This is going to be easier than I thought. He pulled out a long knife and started cleaning his fingernails with the tip. Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll make it. Quick if you cooperate. The young man who looked nervous earlier was now smiling too. Maria realized that her fear was making these criminals feel more confident and dangerous. She needed to stop showing them how scared she was, but it was almost impossible. Her whole body was trembling now. The big man cracked his knuckles, making sounds like tree branches breaking. Boss, let's just get this over with. We still have work to finish down in the valley. The longer we stay up here, the more chances someone else might come looking for her. But the scarred man held up his hand to stop the others. Not so fast. I want to know more about our new friend here. Maria, you said you teach children at the school. That means people in town know you. They'll probably send search parties if you disappear. We need to know exactly who might come looking for you. Maria's mind was racing. She realized the man was right. Her absence would be noticed quickly. She was supposed to have dinner with her sister tonight. When she didn't show up, her sister would call the police. But that wouldn't help her right now. Even if search parties came looking, they would never find her body in these vast mountains. The scarred man continued talking. Tell me, Maria, did you tell anyone where you were going hunting today? Did you leave a note? Did you mark your route on a map? His questions were getting more specific and more frightening. Maria tried to think of a lie that might save her life. Yes, she said quickly. I left detailed maps with my sister. I told her exactly where I would be hunting and what time I would be back. If I'm not home by 6 o'clock tonight, she'll send the sheriff and his men to look for me in this exact area. The men looked at each other with worried expressions. Maria felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe her lie would make them decide she was too dangerous to kill. Maybe they would just tie her up and leave her here while they escaped. But the scarred man was smarter than she hoped. He studied her face carefully for several long seconds. Then his smile came back even colder than before. You're lying, little teacher. I can see it in your eyes. If you had really left maps and directions, you wouldn't have gotten lost and wandered into our operation. You would have stayed on your planned route. Maria felt her last bit of hope disappear. The man was right. She had followed the wounded deer's blood trail far from any area she had planned to hunt. No one knew where she was or would think to look for her here. Nice try, though, the short man with tattoos said. Shows you're not completely stupid. But lying to us was a mistake. Now we're going to have to teach you what happens to people who try to trick us. The young man pulled out a rope from his backpack. Should we tie her up first or just get it over with? He was trying to sound tough like the others, but Maria could hear that he was still nervous about what they were planning to do. As the men discussed the best way to kill her, Maria's mind went back to all the lessons her grandfather had taught her. He had been a Marine for 20 years before he became a hunter. He fought in 3 different wars and survived battles where most of his friends died. When Maria was growing up, he taught her many things that seemed strange for a young girl to learn. Her grandfather taught her how to track animals, but he also taught her how to fight with her hands. He showed her how to use an enemy's size and strength against them. He taught her where to hit a person to cause the most damage with the least effort. He made her practice these fighting moves over and over until they became automatic. If you ever lose your weapon, her grandfather used to say during their training sessions, your body becomes your weapon. But remember, Maria, you will probably only get one chance to fight back. If you miss that chance, you'll be dead. So when the moment comes, you must be faster, smarter, and more vicious than your enemies expect. At the time, Maria thought her grandfather was just being overly careful. She never imagined she would actually need to use his fighting lessons in a real life or death situation. She was just a school teacher in a small mountain town. What were the chances she would ever face trained killers in hand-to-hand combat? Now she understood that her grandfather had been preparing her for exactly this moment. All those hours of practice when she was tired and wanted to quit. All those times he made her repeat the same moves until her muscles ached. He knew that someday her life might depend on remembering his lessons perfectly. The fat man finished, cleaning his knife and put it back in his belt. I think we've talked enough. Time to get down to business. He started walking toward Maria with his hands stretched out to grab her arms. This was the moment her grandfather had trained her for. Maria stopped shaking and felt a strange calm come over her body. Her fear turned into cold determination. These men thought she was just a helpless victim, but they were about to learn they had made a terrible mistake. The fat man reached for her arm, moving slowly because he thought she was too scared to fight back. He was smiling and not paying attention to her hands. Maria let him get close enough to touch her. Then, Faster than a striking snake, she grabbed his wrist with both hands. Maria twisted the man's wrist backward with all her strength, using a technique her grandfather called a wrist break. The fat man's face changed from a confident smile to shock and then to pure agony as the bones in his wrist snapped like dry twigs. He screamed and fell to his knees. Before the other 4 men could react to what had happened, Maria used the fat man's own weight and momentum against him. She pulled his broken wrist forward and down while stepping to the side. The man's body flipped completely over and he crashed face first into the rocky ground with a sound like a bag of cement hitting concrete. The fat man did not get up. He lay still with blood flowing from his nose and mouth. Maria had knocked him, unconscious, with one move that took less than 3 seconds to complete. The other 4 criminals stared at their companion's body in complete shock. "What the hell just happened?" the young man stammered. "How did she do that?" The scarred man's confident smile was completely gone now. For the first time, he looked at Maria with something that might have been respect mixed with fear. "Looks like our little school teacher knows a few things we didn't expect," he said slowly. But Maria was not done yet. Her grandfather had taught her that in a fight against multiple enemies, speed and surprise were everything. She could not give them time to recover from their shock. While they were still confused about what had happened to their friend, she had to keep attacking. The other 4 men were no longer thinking of her as an easy victim. Now they saw her as a real threat that needed to be stopped quickly and violently. They started moving toward her from different directions, trying to surround her again. Maria smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. "Come on then," she said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." The 4 remaining men spread out in a wide circle around Maria. They were no longer underestimating her after seeing what she did to their fat companion who was still lying unconscious on the ground. The scarred leader pulled out his pistol, again, but the other men were too close to Maria for him to get a clear shot without risking hitting his own people. "Take her down, but don't kill her yet," the scarred man shouted to his men. "I want to know where she learned to fight like that. Nobody gets training like that from watching movies or reading books." The young man was the first to attack. He rushed at Maria from her left side, trying to tackle her to the ground. But Maria had been expecting this. Her grandfather had taught her that young fighters always relied too much on speed and not enough on technique. She waited until he was almost close enough to touch her, then stepped to the side like a matador avoiding a charging bull. As the young man stumbled past her, Maria grabbed the back of his shirt and helped his momentum carry him forward. She pushed him hard toward a large pine tree. His head hit the trunk with a loud crack and he collapsed in a heap at the base of the tree. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but he was breathing. He would live, but he would not be getting up for a long time. The short man with tattoos saw what happened to his young partner and decided to be more careful. He pulled out a knife and started circling Maria slowly, looking for an opening. "You got lucky with those first 2, he said, trying to sound confident. "But I've been in more knife fights than you've had hot dinners. Let's see how tough you are against cold steel." Maria kept turning to face him as he circled, never letting him get behind her. Her grandfather had taught her never to let an armed opponent control the distance of a fight. She needed to either stay far enough away that the knife could not reach her, or get close enough to grab his wrist before he could stab her. The tattooed man made his move, lunging forward with the knife aimed at Maria's stomach. But instead of backing away like he expected, Maria stepped forward into the attack. This surprised him so much that his aim went wild. The knife passed harmlessly by her side as she grabbed his wrist with her left hand. With her right hand, Maria delivered a devastating uppercut to the man's chin. Her grandfather had taught her to put her whole body weight behind every punch, not just her arm strength. The blow lifted the tattooed man completely off his feet. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crashed to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The knife flew from his hand and landed in some bushes several feet away. Now only 2 men were left standing, the big man and the scarred leader. Maria was breathing hard, but she felt strong and confident. Her grandfather's training was working perfectly. The techniques he had drilled into her for years were flowing naturally, like she had been born knowing how to fight. The big man looked at his 3 unconscious companions and then back at Maria. For the first time, there was doubt in his cold, dark eyes. He was used to winning fights through sheer size and strength, but this small woman was making his advantages meaningless with her superior skill and training. "Boss," he said to the scarred man, "maybe we should just shoot her and get out of here. This isn't going the way we planned." But the scarred leader was too proud to give up. He had built his reputation on being the toughest and most feared criminal in these mountains. If word got out that a school teacher had defeated his entire crew in hand-to-hand combat, he would lose all respect from other criminals. His business would be ruined. "No," the scarred man said firmly. "She's just one woman. There are still two of us. We finish this the hard way." He put his pistol back in its holster and pulled out a large military knife. The blade was at least 8 inches long and looked like it could cut through bone. The big man nodded and also drew a knife. Now Maria faced two opponents, both armed with deadly weapons, both much bigger and stronger than she was. For the first time since the fight began, she felt a moment of doubt. Could her grandfather's techniques work against two skilled fighters at the same time? Then she remembered something else her grandfather used to tell her. "In a real fight, Maria, there's no such thing as fighting fair. Use everything around you as a weapon. The ground, the trees, even your enemies themselves can be turned against each other if you're smart enough." Maria looked around quickly and saw a pile of loose rocks near her feet. They were about the size of baseballs, perfect for throwing. As the two men started moving toward her from different directions, she grabbed 2 rocks, one in each hand. The big man attacked first, swinging, his knife in a wide arc toward Maria's neck. She ducked under the blade and threw one of her rocks as hard as she could at his knee. The rock hit with a loud crack and the big man screamed in pain. His leg buckled and he fell sideways, grabbing his injured knee with both hands. While the big man was falling, the scarred leader tried to stab Maria from behind, but she spun around and threw her second rock straight at his face. He tried to duck, but the rock caught him on the temple, right next to his old scar. The impact stunned him and he staggered backward, shaking his head to clear his vision. Maria did not waste the opportunity. She rushed forward and jumped up, driving her knee into the scarred man's stomach with all the force she could manage. The blow knocked all the air out of his lungs and he doubled over, gasping for breath. While he was bent over and helpless, Maria grabbed the back of his head with both hands and brought her other knee up toward his face. But the scarred man was tougher than the others. At the last second, he managed to twist away so her knee only grazed his cheek instead of breaking his nose. The scarred man stumbled backward but stayed on his feet. He was hurt but not defeated. Blood was running down his face from where the rock had hit him, but his eyes still burned with rage and determination. "You're good," he admitted, breathing heavily. "Better than I expected. But I've been fighting longer than you've been alive. This ends now." He came at her with his knife held low, using a professional fighting stance that showed he had military training. Maria realized this final opponent would be much more dangerous than the others. He knew how to fight just like she did. This would be a battle between 2 trained fighters and only one of them would walk away alive. The big man was still on the ground holding his injured knee, but he was not out of the fight completely. He pulled out a small pistol from an ankle holster and tried to aim it at Maria. She saw the gun and dove to the side just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet missed her by inches and hit a tree trunk with a loud bang. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder. Maria rolled behind a large boulder and tried to catch her breath. Now she was facing a man with a knife and another with a gun. The odds were getting worse by the second, but Maria was not ready to give up. Her grandfather had not raised a quitter. She looked around for anything she could use as a weapon and spotted a thick branch that had fallen from a tree. It was about 3 feet long and heavy enough to do serious damage. She grabbed the branch and stood up from behind the boulder. The scarred man was moving toward her position while the big man tried to get a clear shot with his pistol. Maria knew she had only seconds before they would corner her. With a wild battle cry that would have made her grandfather proud, Maria charged straight at the scarred man, swinging her improvised club like a baseball bat. Maria's wild charge caught the scarred man completely off guard. He had expected her to stay hidden behind the boulder, not come running straight at him with a thick tree branch raised like a weapon. For a split second, he froze in surprise. and that hesitation cost him dearly. The heavy branch crashed into the side of his head with tremendous force. The impact made a sound like a watermelon being dropped on concrete. The scarred man's eyes went wide, then rolled back in his head as he crumpled to the ground. His knife flew from his hand and landed somewhere in the thick brush. He was not moving, but Maria's victory celebration had to wait. The big man with the injured knee still had his pistol and was trying to line up another shot at her. Even sitting on the ground holding his damaged leg, he was still extremely dangerous. Maria knew that one bullet could end everything, no matter how well she had been trained to fight. She dove behind another tree just as the big man fired his second shot. The bullet splintered bark from the trunk, sending sharp wooden pieces flying past her head. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She had been lucky so far, but luck could run out at any moment. You can't hide forever. "Lady," the big man shouted from his position on the ground, "I got 3 more bullets in this gun, and sooner or later I'm going to put one of them in you. Why don't you just come out and make this easy on both of us?" Maria looked around desperately for something that could help her. The tree she was hiding behind was thick enough to stop bullets, but she could not stay there forever. Eventually, the big man would either hit her with a lucky shot, or one of his unconscious friends would wake up and join the fight again. Then she noticed something that gave her an idea. About 20 feet away, she could see her grandfather's rifle, where the big man had kicked it earlier. It had landed in a thick patch of ferns and small bushes. If she could reach it and it was still loaded, she would have a real weapon instead of just sticks and rocks. But getting to the rifle meant crossing 20 feet of open ground while a man with a pistol tried to kill her. It seemed impossible. The big man would have plenty of time to aim and fire before she could reach the weapon. Even if she ran in a zigzag pattern, the chances of making it were very small. Maria closed her eyes and tried to think of what her grandfather would do in this situation. He always said that sometimes the most dangerous plan was actually the safest one, because enemies never expected you to do something that seemed crazy. She picked up 2 more rocks from the ground near her feet. Then she took 3 deep breaths and burst out from behind the tree, running as fast as she had ever run in her life. But instead of running straight toward the rifle, she ran directly at the big man with the gun. The big man was so surprised by this suicidal attack that he missed his 3rd shot completely. The bullet went wild, hitting a tree branch 15 feet above Maria's head. By the time he realized what she was doing and tried to aim again, Maria was already throwing her first rock at his gun hand. The rock hit his wrist hard enough to break bones. The big man screamed in pain and dropped his pistol. Before he could reach for it with his other hand, Maria threw her 2nd rock at his head. This one caught him right between the eyes and he fell backward, unconscious before he hit the ground. Maria stood over the 5 defeated men, breathing heavily but victorious. The entire fight had lasted exactly 83 seconds from the moment the young man first attacked her until the big man fell unconscious. She looked at her grandfather's old watch to check the time. It was 11:47 in the morning. Less than 2 minutes ago, she had been facing certain death. Now all 5 criminals were lying motionless on the forest floor. She quickly gathered up all the weapons she could find. 3 pistols, 2 knives, and her own rifle, which thankfully was not damaged. Maria also found rope in one of the men's backpacks and used it to tie their hands and feet securely. She was not taking any chances of them waking up and attacking her again. The fat man with the black beard was starting to moan and move his head slightly. Maria checked his pulse and breathing. He was alive but would probably have a serious concussion. The young man was also beginning to stir. She had hit him hard enough to knock him out, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. The tattooed man and the scarred leader were still completely unconscious, but they were both breathing normally. The big man had a lump on his forehead, the size of a golf ball where her rock had hit him, but he too would survive. Maria felt relieved that she had not been forced to kill anyone, even though they certainly would have killed her without hesitation. She searched through their equipment and found several cell phones. None of them worked in this remote location, but she kept walking until she found a spot on higher ground, where one phone finally got a weak signal. Maria dialed 911 and gave the emergency operator her exact GPS location from the phone's navigation system. "This is Maria Santos," she told the operator. I'm about 15 miles northeast of Cedar Falls in the Glacier Peak area. I need police and ambulances. I have 5 unconscious men here who were running some kind of drug operation. They attacked me and I had to defend myself. Some of them might need medical attention. The operator asked her to stay on the line while she contacted the local sheriff's department. Within minutes, Maria could hear helicopters in the distance. The state police had sent their emergency response team by air, since the location was too remote for ground vehicles to reach quickly. When the officers arrived, they found Maria sitting calmly beside the 5 tied-up criminals, her rifle across, her lap and all their weapons piled nearby. The lead officer, Sheriff Johnson, had known Maria since she was a child. He took one look at the scene and shook his head in amazement. "Maria, what in the world happened here?" he asked. "When we got the call, we thought maybe you had stumbled onto their camp and managed to call for help before they caught you. We were expecting to find you held hostage, not sitting here with all of them trussed up like Christmas turkeys." Maria told the whole story while the paramedics checked on the 5 unconscious men. The officers took photographs of the crime scene and gathered up all the evidence, including several pounds of illegal drugs and a large amount of cash. It was clearly a major drug distribution operation that had been broken up thanks to Maria's accidental discovery. "You realize what you did here, don't you?" Sheriff Johnson said as they prepared to leave. "These 5 men are on the FBI's most wanted list. They're responsible for bringing drugs into half the counties in Montana. There's a $50,000 reward for their capture." Maria was too exhausted to care about money. All she wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and forget this day had ever happened. But she knew she would never really forget it. This day had changed her forever. She had discovered that when her life depended on it, she was capable of things she never imagined possible. As the helicopter carried her back to town, Maria looked down at the forest where she had almost died. She whispered a quiet thank you to her grandfather for preparing her to survive this terrible day. His lessons had not just saved her life. They had helped her save other people by stopping dangerous criminals. That evening, Maria called her sister to tell her she would be late for dinner. She did not mention what had happened in the forest. That story would have to wait until she was ready to tell it. For now, she just wanted to sit quietly and remember what her grandfather used to say about courage. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Maria. Courage is doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. Today you showed more courage than most people will ever need in their entire lives." Maria smiled and touched the old rifle that was now leaning against her kitchen wall. Tomorrow she would clean and oil it carefully, just like her grandfather had taught her. And maybe, just maybe, she would start teaching other people the same lessons that had saved her life today.